Welcome back to Media7, where I've been discussing drugs, dependence and the media with the UN Drug Dependence and Treatment Goodwill Ambassador Christopher Kennedy Lawford. Now, in this week's Source, Sam Mulgrew looks at the consequences of prohibition and wonders if sometimes the cure is worse than the disease.
Switch on the telly and chances are you'll see people with drugs being humiliated and criminalised on TV. It's the latest tactic in a movement first kicked off by notorious liar and warmonger Tricky Dick Nixon. His proclamation of the war on drugs back in 1971 caught on in New Zealand. It continues to result in the punishment and marginalisation of more than 5,000 Kiwis every year under our Misuse of Drugs Act. But that's a drop in the ocean compared with the hundreds of thousands of drug users in New Zealand who haven't yet been caught. Heroin. In 2001, when Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar pronounced the growing of poppies to be un-Islamic, Afghanistani production fell 91% in a single year. Then the West invaded. Opium production skyrocketed to record levels. Today, 63% of all the world's opiates come from Afghanistan. The Mexican drug war. It mostly involves substances on their way to America. The conflict is by far the world's most deadly ongoing war, though the news won't tell you that. 3.5 times more people died in that war last year than in Iraq. Americans love drugs. In America, about 40% of people in rehab are addicted to prescription medication, and nearly 1 in 12 youths use prescription drugs for non-medical purposes. Now, a case study for changing all this is Portugal. In 2001, the possession of all drugs was decriminalised. Users are helped, not punished. They don't get a criminal record, though it is still illegal to deal or produce. 10 years on, drug users in treatment up 63%. New cases of drug-related HIV down 70%. Problem drug users down 50%. Drug-related deaths down. Illicit drug prices down. Drug use among adolescents down. The criminal justice system eased.
Sam Mulgrew there. We're joined now by the Executive Director of the New Zealand Drug Foundation, Ross Bell.
G'day,
Welcome, Ross. Now, you've brought Christopher here. With what aim?
I think he speaks for himself, doesn't he? Deliberately in February, because the new government has been formed. There was an election, various issues were in that election. We're fearful that drugs, more resources for treatment might fall off the agenda. So having someone like Chris over here to put drugs, put addiction treatment, put recovery back on the political agenda was the reason we brought him in February. But I think he brings a very powerful message, as you've heard.
You often use the phrase harm reduction. Christopher used the phrase demand reduction. The two aren't the same thing, are they?
Not necessarily. I think probably harm reduction is a subset of demand reduction. Harm reduction would be a series of services like needle exchange, for example, and demand reduction is the bigger thing around needle exchange, but also access for treatment.
Does the Portuguese policy, does it stack up? Is it really as compelling as it looks?
Well, I think it is. If we look exactly what Portugal did, I don't think we should try to oversell Portugal too much, though. So yes, they did decriminalise drug use for all drugs, and I think that's important. But at the same time, they put a ton of money into treatment. And so what you saw was fewer overdose deaths, fewer people going into prison, fewer deaths in prison, reduced overcrowding, fewer young people using drugs, more adults using cannabis, and fewer people using heroin. But that was not just because they decriminalised, it's because they put in a full package, I think.
Now, Christopher, you are, I gather, in favour of decriminalisation in certain ways, not of legalisation.
Right. I think drugs should be decriminalised. I'm not in favour of legalisation primarily because the two most devastating drugs on the planet and to the individual and to society are the two legal drugs, nicotine and alcohol. So I don't think we need another legal drug. But I do think that for possession, these should be decriminalized and they should be looked at as a health issue.
Is there a limit to how much we can medicalise drug use, though? I mean, the kid who gets caught with a joint or a pill at a dance party, what are you treating there if you send them into treatment? Youth?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, everybody has to be assessed. I mean, it's not, you know, I mean, kids do experiment. And obviously, you know, the more education we have, people ask me this question all the time, and I have kids of my own, and they've all experimented. I have a daughter who's 2.5 years sober. But I think the issue with children is, you know, is the conversation. We have to bring it out. We have to talk about it. And kids make good decisions with good information and with good boundaries. And that's what they need. The problem is that a lot of these kids are growing up in cultures and families where there's active addiction and there's all sorts of other issues. There's, you know, trauma, there's poverty, there's abuse, there's all sorts of things going on. And these are the other things that need to be addressed. I mean, where are we going to spend our money? Are we going to spend our money on our people, or are we going to spend our money on something else? And I think, you know, with children, we can make a huge difference. That's where interventions can be enormously helpful, but not every kid needs to be intervened on.
Now, Ross, we do have our own public health campaigns here, the drug driving ads. I'll ask you about those after we see it.
Sure.
You all right?
I don't really feel comfortable with you driving.
Cross the road and pull over, please.
Yeah, off your tits, mate.
Drivers on drugs. There could be more of them on our roads than you think. To find out how New Zealanders feel about it, over 4 days we filmed 147 people who thought they were being driven to a costume fitting for a TV ad. What they didn't realise was their drivers were actually actors who were faking driving on.
Ross, what do you make of that campaign? Because to be honest, I've been somewhat confused by it.
It could have been a lot worse. Some of
That's a ringing endorsement.
And I think we have to look at what the government is trying to do. I think they're not trying to get people who are driving high to stop. They're trying to raise awareness. And other international campaigns use the real horrible, scary... This is the same kind of stuff that we used to have around alcohol, the crash, the blood, the death, the scariness. So that campaign could have gone down that track and they didn't. They're trying to raise a national conversation. I think those of us who probably know people who use drugs a bit more might think that some of the acting's a bit bullshit. But people are talking about this. And I think what needs to be... Because we think drug driving is certainly a problem in this country. I think what we need to be doing is talking to people who use drugs, who think it's okay to drive under the influence, and start busting some of the myths that those folks have.
Is it a difficult balance to strike? Because if you're seen to be lecturing, I assume that a part of your target audience is just going to turn off, aren't they?
Well, I think that's the risk, and I think just watching some of the feedback, because that campaign's backed up by some Facebook and other things, and just looking at some of the conversations that are taking place, I think the people who do use drugs and drive are not at all convinced by the campaign. So I think we probably need to talk to those folks differently. But it is raising awareness about this issue, and it is an issue that I think has gone unaddressed for some time.
Christopher, how well do you think these campaigns work in the US? Because certainly the one that everyone knows about, This Is Your Brain on Drugs, became a joke. It became absorbed into drug culture, didn't it?
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs.
I'm not convinced that these kind of scary tactic kinds of things are all bad. I mean, I think that they have to be, you have to see them for what they are. With drug driving, I mean, this is an issue that was never an issue until recently. We did some tests at the Department of Transportation in the United States, did some random testing, and found that, I mean, it was upwards of 30% of the people that they stopped had, you know, some kind of prescription drug or marijuana. I mean, and the scary thing is, folks really believe that there is a difference between driving drunk and driving high. I mean, that's really, and the fact that we're even addressing it at this point is progress. I mean, these things, the progress with these things are incremental. And the more we can talk about it, the more shows like this, the more advertising, whatever it is a good thing.
Can we just say no to drugs and expect that to be the case, though?
No, you can say no when you're talking about prevention. You can't say no when you're talking about treatment. That it doesn't work. Say no. I mean, you can tell kids, look, you can say no to this. It's okay to say no and support them in that. I mean,
which is a nice fine distinction. You're not ordering them to say no, you're saying you can say no.
Absolutely.
How well do we do messaging here, Ross?
Well, we don't. And again, one of the messages that Chris is bringing is around more people in recovery speaking out, and we do that in a very small way. The Drug Foundation runs a couple of websites where we are telling people stories to bring a message of hope. But that's really the only thing that New Zealand does do.
And I imagine telling stories works well in that prison environment that you mentioned before. Someone who's actually got, for want of a better word, the credibility to tell that story.
People who have been there, done that, rather than having the doctor in a white coat, I think is more credible. And people believe that message.
What we need to get to, though, is the belief in the people that have this illness, that they're better than their illness, and that they have something to give the world. So it's not just about telling their story of addiction, it's about telling their story of recovery and transformation. Those are the stories that I'm interested in seeing, and those are the stories that are going to change the face of this thing.
So that's the goal. That's the goal.
Well,
for
one
you.
of them, yeah. One of them.
Oh, thank you very much, gentlemen. That is our show for this week. Thanks to Christopher Kennedy Lawford and Ross Bell, and thanks to you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye. Thanks, guys.